We all as manufacturing business owners out there are excited and happy to see RFQs or requests for quotes across our desks. But there are some things that you should be watching out for when they come to you. What's up guys? Ian Sandusky from Lakewood Machine and Tool back here again for Practical Machinist. And today on Machine Shop Talk, we're gonna be diving into some red flags when it comes to RFQs that you should be aware of. But before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. Let's get into it. Okay guys, so as promised today on Shop Talk, we are going to be discussing some red flags when it comes to RFQs or requests for quotes. We're gonna be calling them RFQs in this video, otherwise I'm gonna be saying request for quote about 1,000 times. So RFQ, request for quote. So I was on the Practical Machinist forums, which are amazing. If you haven't checked them out, make sure you do. But I was on the shop ownership and management subforum. I really like checking out this forum. I find there's a lot of really good questions. And one thread popped up that was non-typical for the kind of questions you typically see on the Practical Machinist shop management and ownership subforum. The reason it was non-typical is that it wasn't a shop owner or manager coming on with a question. In this case, it was a potential machine shop customer coming on. And they came on because they were having a bit of an issue that they were sending out a lot of quotes and they weren't getting any kind of response. And they were coming on to ask the community at the Practical Machinist forums why this was happening. So quickly, let's cover the thread because it kind of deviates off of that. But to cover the thread and what happened there, this person came on with their story and they had some parts they wanted to get made. It sounded like they had some machining experience, but they're not a machinist. And they wanted some it was difficult to tell because we'll get into this. It's difficult to tell how big these parts were to begin with, but they were these parts that had some crazy tight tolerances. They had some really weird features, and I believe they were made out of some kind of exotic material. It wasn't just out of steel or Inconel. I believe it was some kind of a weird material that I'm not even familiar with. And what had happened was they've been sending out these drawings and requests for quotes to all these shops in their area and even some that were outside. And what they were experiencing was either shops were no quoting on it. So a no quote is when you send out a RFQ and they just say, we either can't or won't do this, or they were getting no responses at all. And so to make the situation easier to explain, they actually uploaded their drawing of what they wanted to get made and said, guys, what am I doing wrong here? And the reason this thread was even more interesting is that while this thread started off with the very experienced machinist community on the Practical Machinist forums giving their feedback on what was wrong with the process, what was wrong with the drawings, it very quickly turned into a catalog of sorts of red flags that people should watch out for when they're getting quotes and drawings crossing their desks. And as the Practical Machinist forums are, they're mostly US, but you have European people in there, you have South American people in there, you have Asian people in there, people who work in all these areas. It was really interesting to see how many of these red flags I've seen before and how many are pretty much universal. Some of these things I thought were things that only I really look out for, but it turns out that, right across the board, these are some red flags that you should look for. So I thought we'd go through them and, it would hopefully help you out when you get these drawings and RFQs crossing your desk, maybe just to set off a little alarm in your head. And just to clarify, red flag does not necessarily mean that you shouldn't do it. Red flag does not mean the person asking you for this job or that the job itself is bad. It just means that you're gonna need to pay a little bit more attention here, or you should be a little wary if you see these things pop up. So the first red flag that I saw and people listed there that I think you should watch out for, and it really is the most important, is overcomplicated and over-tolerance drawings. First off, there's nothing wrong with being new, whether you're a new engineer, a new machinist, or new to making drawings. Maybe you're just not experienced at making machining drawings. Maybe you know how to make scientific drawings. Maybe you know how to make a back of a napkin scratch. There's nothing wrong with that. That said, when you're in this business on the manufacturing side, and you see a drawing cross your desk that is overcomplicated, so it's difficult to read, there's a lot of features called out, there's redundant features called out, so there may be a dimension here, 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 when really there needs to be 2 dimensions on there. There's overlapping lines, there's section drawings that don't make sense. Maybe there's a lot of information on non-essential stuff, but they don't even list the thickness of the part. This is what I mean when I say overcomplicated. And if you see a drawing like this, and if you go on to the Practical Machinist forum, which we'll link above here to this drawing, you can kind of see what I mean. This is a very, very complicated drawing. And this immediately should set off a red flag in your head. This, in my experience, and what other people said on the forum, points to a couple of things, or at least a couple of possibilities. The first possibility, if you get an overcomplicated drawing, is that the person who made this drawing isn't familiar with making drawings and doesn't understand what's pertinent information and what is excessive information when making their drawing. You see this a lot with people who are from outside industries to machining. For their industry, maybe you need all this information on a drawing and you get it to a machining or a manufacturing industry type person and you say, what is all this? There's nothing inherently wrong with this, but it does mean that it's probably going to eat up more of your time to figure out what is actually important, what's not important. Sometimes, I mean, to give you a personal example, a lot of architectural clients, we've had some architectural clients who are fantastic customers, they're great, but they don't work in machining type drawings. They work in architectural drawings. So as a machinist, when I get an architectural drawing, I don't know if some of you guys have seen these, sometimes literally I'll have to go back and forth with them 4 times to figure out what parts they actually want, because architectural drawings show all these crazy details. The things they pull out and the things that architectural drawings find important are not what I find important. I want 1, 2, 3, this is what you're making. I don't want a scale drawing of the building. So it doesn't mean necessarily that that's going to be a problem. It just means that you're going to have to do a bit more work if that's the case. The second thing that an overcomplicated drawing can point to, and this one is a definite red flag in terms of you should be careful, it can show that the person who sent this RFQ not only doesn't understand the drawing or the drawing you're looking for, but it can show that they actually don't even understand the part that they're asking for. Like they don't understand the component that they want you to machine. This to me is a huge red flag because it means that because this person may not understand what this component is, they probably don't know themselves what is important on this drawing. They probably don't know what is important for this component. So it means that there's a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong. It means there's gonna be a lot of back and forth to figure out what it is. If they don't know what's important and what's not, it means there's probably gonna be rework. And yeah, we can always say, well, I shipped the part to the drawing. You're responsible to pay me for any rework. That's all nice to say, that's great. That is the way the world is, but it's still a headache. If someone gets a part made, whether they're in the wrong or not, they don't wanna pay more to get it remade. So now you're gonna have to go and deal with that. And what if they refuse to pay? Now you gotta deal with all that. It just means there's a lot more potential for headaches with that customer. And it's gonna make me really evaluate whether I want to even bother getting involved with that. The other thing, if they don't understand the component they're asking for, what that can point to is that this isn't actually their drawing. I haven't had this experience, but some of the guys on the forums actually told this story of when they had this situation. They got a drawing that was overcomplicated. They talked to the guy, he couldn't tell them what was important. He refused to simplify, refused to explain. He just wanted to quote on the part. Turned out that that was a stolen drawing. Somehow this guy had gotten his hand on a drawing from a competitor's company, or a company that, I don't know if it was competitor's company or a company that he wanted to try to compete with. So, he was buying some part. He says, I can do that for cheaper. Somehow he gets the drawing, and now he's trying to go around and undercut them with what could be a patented drawing. This is a huge, I've never experienced this, but this is a huge problem. You absolutely never want to get involved in a situation like this, period. If there's ever any doubt as to, if you ever get a warning bell in your head going off that something's a little amiss here, I don't know if this guy actually owns this drawing, 99% of the time, it's best to just completely avoid it, send them on their way. No amount of money is worth a lawsuit that can kill your business. Do your homework, I guess, if this situation comes up, is what I'm saying. The other side of this, as mentioned, so we got overcomplicated. The other side is over-tolerance drawings. For those of you who may be newer to the trade or maybe newer with dealing with drawings or the quoting process, over tolerance means, so a tolerance means the acceptable level of deviation acceptable for a part or feature. So for instance, if you have a tolerance on a hole location of plus minus 5 thou, that means that hole is allowed to be out by at most 5 thou in either direction, and that's acceptable. Every drawing out there has some level of tolerance on it. I have never seen a zero tolerance drawing in my life because it just doesn't exist. That said, some tolerances are big. If you're dealing with, you know, Joe Blow in his garage who wants to make some furniture brackets, he's probably gonna give you a 1/16 tolerance because he's gonna ram some self-tapping screws in there. He just needs this to hold up a shelf. If you're dealing with aerospace, you may be dealing with really, really tight tolerances, but there's a lot more that goes into that for those tolerances, as in those are higher paying jobs. They usually have CMM report mandatory. You usually have to be ISO or whatever the aerospace certification is to be able to do that. So there's nothing wrong with having a tight tolerance, but there is something wrong with being over toleranced. And what over toleranced means is that when someone is either giving you unnecessarily tight tolerances for the fit and function of the part, or it's when they're just so tight. So tolerances can stack. So if you have a 1 thou tolerance on this feature and then the next one has a 1 thou tolerance on that feature chained to that, and so on and so on, and then the overall has a 1 thou tolerance, your tolerance on those little features, although it says 1 thou, because tolerance is stacked, it may be 2/10 or it may be a millionth. Like, it's crazy how quick they can stack. And usually over tolerance drawings come from people who aren't familiar with machining. They think if the more tolerances they slap on there, the more accurate the part's gonna be. And we all know in manufacturing that's not accurate. Usually you want a tolerance, tight tolerance, the parts or the features, they're very important, and you don't tight tolerance the things that aren't, because otherwise your price is gonna go here when really it should be here. For instance, in this person's drawing, to go back to the forum post that kind of sparked this, they had something like 2 millionths tolerance on just about every feature by the time you stacked and, you know, amalgamated all these tolerances. And then on top of that, they had some weird countersinks that went in on an angle, and they had some I don't even know how to describe. I think it's in minutes or seconds when you're dealing with the angle of something. They had some insanely tight tolerance on the angles of these countersinks that everybody called out and said, you know, this, what are you doing here? This is a huge problem if you see things like this, because, you know, for instance, to reference that drawing, for one, I don't even have equipment in my shop to measure something to that tight of a tolerance. We don't have a CMM, you know, yeah, I could send it out, so on and so forth. But some of these things, the tolerance he was asking for, with my machines, you know, when you account for thermal growth, when you account for deflection, when you account for, you know, just the actual manufacturer's guidelines for what that machine is capable of, my machine couldn't even produce things with that level of accuracy and repeatability. And then on top of that, when you're dealing with some of these angled features that are whatever it may be, I don't even know how someone could measure that feature without some kind of insane level of, you know, research lab. And this wasn't just my opinion, this was the same thing that everybody in the forum said, you know, I wouldn't even know how to measure that if you asked me to. And the thing is, the person who's getting this part, they were asking him, so you get this part, you have these crazy tight tolerances, how are you going to measure this? And I believe the response was something like, well, I'll know if it works. That is not what you want to hear by any means. What this really does is it gives when you have over tolerance drawings and these weird things that you don't even know how to measure, and it sounds like the people there don't even know how to measure, is it gives them a lot of reasons to, rightly or wrongly, to reject your parts. And you don't want rejected parts, they don't want rejected parts. It just doesn't make any sense. For a second, it shows that if they have some part with all these crazy tolerances and they say, nope, I need this, you know, I've got over tolerance drawings before, and I'll go to them and say, hey, listen, is this really necessary? And they say, nah, you know what, I was getting picky. These are the important things. Okay, but if you go to them and you say, hey, listen, is this necessary? And they say yes. If everything's that tight, it can point to the fact that there's a very fatal flaw in the design, especially if this is a prototype, which, you know, this part that we're talking about on the Practical Machinist forums, this is some kind of prototype. It shows there's probably a fatal flaw in the design, because if you need all these crazy tight tolerances for seemingly no reason, there's probably an issue there. And again, it's just another opportunity for blowback for you as a machining business. The third red flag, number 3, when you get an RFQ, is when it comes with an expected price point attached to it. So someone sends you an RFQ and says, hey, I want to get these parts made and I would like to pay, or I want to pay $30 per part. Again, as I mentioned, all red flags are not necessarily bad. I've had, and I'm sure you guys have had, plenty of experiences with companies coming to you saying, hey, listen, I'm getting these parts made for X, can you match it? Or hey, I'm getting this part made, but you know, I understand material prices going up, we want to spend about this, can you do it? There's nothing wrong with this inherently. I've had this work out great many times. You know, it can tell you their budget. So if they tell you 30 bucks and you can do it for 25, great. You're making an extra 5 bucks. Tell them 27 and you'll undercut. What it can point to as a red flag is that, especially again, if it's a one-man show, hobby shop, new startup, not established customer, it can point towards a tight budget. And again, there's nothing wrong with having a budget. But what it does is it says, hey, I want to pay $30 per part. Now, if I want to charge him 45 because I feel like that's what it's going to have to cost me to make that part, you know, that's what it's going to take for me to be whole on that job, I know right off the bat, I'm going to have to fight this guy for a 50% increase. And frankly, you know, it would be silly to say that when people get parts quoted out, they didn't have a price in mind. I think obviously when everybody's designing, usually they're designing for cost, manufacturability, etc. It's not like people send out RFQs blindly and say, I have no idea what this is going to cost. But when it comes attached with a number that sounds hard, basically to me it just means there's going to be a lot more justification involved with any amount of increase on there. It means they're going to be fighting me to get it down to that price. It means we're going to be going back and forth a lot, trying to eliminate features or simplify. And again, while none of this is necessarily bad, it's definitely a red flag as to, do I want to spend all this time on this job? Because if this is a $100,000 job in total, yeah, you know what? I'll fight to try to get that down for them. It makes sense. If this is a $200 job for a guy off the street, I say it's going to cost $400. Do I want to spend 3 hours going back and forth with this guy to fight for $200? To me, it's probably not worth it. Probably not going to be a repeat job. Probably not going to be a great customer. It's just a red flag that goes up that says, do I want to do this? How much time do I want to spend on it? Going back to the thread, again, as a point of reference, because this is where this all came from, the person who was asking for these parts, these very complicated, remember, very tight tolerance, over toleranced, complicated drawing, exotic material, they said for their run of 20 to 30 parts, they were hoping to pay at most $300. Sadly to say, that got eviscerated very quickly. You know, everybody on the forums basically said anybody with the machine capability to do this, the CMM capability to measure it, and then who also wants to take a risk on it, they're probably not going to touch it for under $1,000 a part, because you're dealing with guys with really expensive machines, you're dealing with guys who have better stuff to do, and you are an unknown. So, you know, just to kind of prove this point, walking in with a price point is good, but you should at least be aware that if this happens, this is a good example of why that can be bad. In any case, guys, I did find this thread super interesting, so I hope you check it out. It's a bit of a long one, but there was a lot of really good information in there, and it's interesting to see a real life case study on something like this, so I do hope you check it out. And I'd like to know in the comments below some of the red flags that you guys look out for when you get an RFQ. What are some things that kind of raise the hair on the back of your neck or maybe make you second guess what you're doing? As always, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications below to make sure you never miss a video. Thank you very much for watching, guys. You take care.